salutations. My name is Joshua. Greetings. My name is Joshua Free. Greetings. My name is Joshua Free, and this is episode 10 of Mardukite TV Season 4. Greetings. My name is Joshua Free. Greetings and salutations. My name is Joshua Free. Greetings. My name is Joshua Free, and we are resuming Mardukite TV Season 4. In this season, we have been talking about books, and lots of books. I don't plan to slow down any there. Hi there, my name is Joshua Free. Greetings, my name is Joshua Free.
Greetings to viewers, people of Earth and beyond. We can't really be sure who and how far YouTube's been reaching these days. So as many of you know, my name is Joshua Free. I'm the founder, director of modern Mardukite movement, Mardukite Babylon, developer of Magickal Arcanum, the Untitled Bible. Greetings, and welcome to Borsippa headquarters in our episode of Ascending Order. In case you've been asleep the past couple minutes or dialogue was too complicated, my name is Joshua Free. Okay, so this is March 27th. It's been, I guess, another couple weeks the last time I talked to you. We do have some news, actually. This broadcast is a little later than I anticipated, but this is the busy season for everything that we set up for practically the whole course of the year. It happens usually between spring equinox and Beltane. And so, of course, we just recently observed the Akiti, or Akitu, is the Babylonian New Year, which originally, it's what marks the age of Marduk, the sun entering into the field of Aries. We follow, actually, a snapshot of this astrology even today, because the sun no longer, that indicates what age we're in, and with precession, so forth. The sun actually no longer rises in Aries. It's just observed that way in like traditional astrology and stuff. So I did complete the Crystal Clear 2nd edition, and in addition to that, I just recently completed doing the vocabulary for the Academy editions as opposed to the footnotes. As many of you know, the vocabulary, it's introduced with bold-faced letters whenever a word is first introduced in the text, and then there's a glossary at the back, as opposed to imposing hundreds of footnotes. So I just recently completed that, and also we're going to have a sequel to the Draconomicon, which is the Barrett researches. You've probably seen the material. If you have Merlin's Complete Book of Druidism, you've seen it pretty much composes almost the second half of the book. That material will finally be released on its own as a standalone edition, hardcover, kind of go along with the other Draconomicon. Both of those were actually projects that I'd worked on in the mid-90s at the same time, so they do actually go together. Now, we're pushing for a Beltane release on that, which gives us a little bit more than a month. And for all those, the Crystal Clear 2nd edition, Liber 3E, which is one of the other projects that I've been anticipating. It's the crossover project from grade 4 to grade 5, and it's actually kind of critical. There'll be also the laws of the New World in there, and these come actually from above. It has nothing to do with my personal opinion and so forth. So that will be involved in there. We'll probably end up publishing actually that stuff independently or on the website or whatnot. It's just a brief section of the book. So give us the rest of March probably to do the setups and get all that arranged and so forth for pre-ordering at your favorite book source. The other thing that's come up recently, given the state of the world, in the original thesis that I did, it's a part of that. That was a composite project in the transhuman generations and patterns and cycles. I started getting a little bit more into real world, well, at the time still theory. We've since advanced systemology far and beyond that, but it really all did begin with the original thesis. And so there's something put forth in there concerning generational cycles and so forth, and an 84-year cycle that we actually operate under, like socially and civically. And so a lot of the stuff that is happening in the world today, this is reminiscent of a time period. I was just remarking, I believe it was on Facebook just recently, about that we're only like a year off of like an 84-year cycle of when the Nazis invaded Poland. So when you look at 84, these 84-year cycles, which is 4 generations of 21 years each, and such, and so forth, you actually begin to see a pattern, particularly in the Western world, and possibly even prior to that. You see this pattern that just kind of repeats itself cyclically. The means, of course, the details change as we've quote unquote advanced technologically and so forth, but it doesn't surprise me, considering the kind of like the Liber 3E or Liber 3 project. It's kind of going to create, it's a bridge from grade 4 to 5 for those that it's accessible to, but at the same time it's going to really define kind of a marking point or whatnot, a boundary, a pass not ring for a lot of individuals that are just really ready, or rather not ready to advance to that level. And so it's curious to see, by our latest numbers, 70% actually of our following, whether it's been the printed materials on YouTube, so on and so forth, is actually millennials. The remaining, those, and by that I mean those born after 1981. The majority of the remainder is Gen X, and we have very few born, even during or before the 1960s that are real involved or apply this stuff, deeply to their lives and so on and so forth. We're talking about basically coming up against what you would consider the boundary of experience, and this is what most people, they pride themselves on. They pride themselves on this experience. They pride themselves on the ability to rely on, what they believe they know or whatever has carried them to a certain point, and that becomes crystallized or kind of static as an individual ages. This is kind of unfortunate, because this is one of the problems of experience. Experience, I've kind of harped on some of the other generational stuff in former videos, but the experience, if we were to expect it to be of this great esteemed value that is placed on it, you would see an increase. You would see an individual get better as they go on. They wouldn't succumb to more and more of the effects of the physical universe. They wouldn't necessarily find themselves in a position. I mean, when we consider experience by stimulus response, and I'm talking again about defragmentation versus fragmentation, in terms of where people are operating from. But traditionally, experience, really, by stimulus response, you're talking about things that are either getting taken out of your control because there's some natural tendency now that's taking over, that's kind of calling the shots or evaluating for you. But then again, what an individual is no longer willing to do. They have a bad experience regarding some facet of life, and therefore remove themselves or completely withdraw from that facet of life. This is what most of the time when we talk about experience, we talk about, people learning from their mistakes or this, that, and the other. Those applications really only are logical in the incident in which it took place. It has no other use, no other evaluative use, unless an individual is in that same time and space again. So when someone withdraws more and more through life, we see their experience basically causing them to do less, to have less, to know less, to be willing to move less, and until they've reached a point where it's almost unbearable to keep going on in this lifetime. They abandon the body. That's why I say ascension. The path to ascension, what we're proposing on the pathway, and the work and these cumulative grades that we've kind of established for it, this is what I see in other individuals doing during the course of their normal, even intelligent lifetimes. We're not talking about just stupid people here. We're talking about literally the fact that most people decline as they continue on, and they don't reach higher vistas. And ascension is not imminent. It is not a guaranteed state for anybody. Now, let's see. Let me just make sure we've got everything we're covering here. So before I turn you over to the Mardukite Master Course, I thought I would point out one of the other things we have planned. There is the complete Mardukite Master Course, Keys to Gates of Higher Understanding, this huge textbook, which is primarily transcripts from the 48 lectures that were given for the Academy for the Mardukite Master Course. Now, we have plans of breaking this down into 4 volumes, since it covered 4 different, basically, routes. There's the Magic and Mysticism with Route A, Druidism, the Dragon Tradition for Route D. We have, for Route 2, or Grade 2, we have the Mardukite, all of the Mesopotamian, all of the Anunnaki, the entire Zuism tradition, and so on. That's in there. And then, of course, Grade 3 being the grade of Mardukite Systemology, which is where we made our probably biggest transition into the work that we do today. I've just completed Grade 4, so that is the first one beyond the master grades. It's kind of a pre-wizard grade. The rest of ours are being treated as wizard grades. Grades 5, 6, and 7 are grades 1, 2, and 3, or levels 1, 2, and 3 for the wizard grades. And of course, we have the 0 level, which is grade 4, which I just completed the transition for. We should have, again, all of that out by Beltane. So the Mardukite Master Course lecture that we have, this is the 3rd lecture, 3rd episode in the series, 3rd lecture that we're including here. Goes along with the latest edition of the Great Magickal Arcanum. So, without further ado, we will turn you over to the Mardukite Master Course. Thank you for watching.
Since when does normal win a goddamn prize, huh?
Great Magickal Arcanum. This lecture is 30 minutes long, as given by Joshua Free in September 2020. Produced by the Mardukite Academy of Systemology. All rights reserved.
Alright, so let's go ahead and focus on Grade 1, Route A, the route of magic and mysticism. Now, this is fundamentally the textbook, The Great Magickal Arcanum. When you're leading a seeker through this part of the route, originally the Sorcerer's Handbook was compiled specifically for this reason. It was compiled for groups that I was working with back in the mid-90s, actually, and it has a pretty concise sequence of development. If you want to take a seeker up the pathway of fundamentals as it applies to magic, yeah, magical correspondences, basic techniques and exercises, witchcraft and Wicca, arts of spellcraft and ritual magic, elemental magic and druid power, the high magic of the Golden Dawn, Enochian magic, and then of course the Necronomicon in Mesopotamia. And there you see we have a couple bridges. There's a bridge there at the end, of course, with the assumption that an individual might lead directly to grade 2 from the route of magic, using the Necronomicon and Mesopotamia as a bridge. The other being midway there, elemental magic and druid power, being able to tie in to that other route, Route D, for the grade, because there's many individuals that are going to be more interested in those elements as opposed to the ceremonial magic and high traditions of, for example, the Golden Dawn and Enochian practices and so forth. So it should be understood in delivering, you know, a course like this to your seekers, or even as is presented at the Mardukite Academy for this magic school, you don't require that an individual actually, you know, conduct all of these ceremonial and ritual practices that are discovered. The Sorcerer's Handbook is very concise in its relay and the sequence and moving along someone through the pathway of at least occult studies relatively quickly. The benefit of Arcanum as a companion to that is the ability to pursue deeper explorations as they relate to other explorations and realizations in different paradigms. Now, we really don't want to keep seekers suspended into lifelong pursuits involving conventional magic, or to keep them perpetually remaining in the effects, as the magical traditions tend to do, of some other determined, indeterminable source of mystical cause that is outside from the individual. The purpose of our tradition is to bring the power and control and command of self back under the responsibility and management of self, and not to be looking to outside sources. Now, what happens is that an individual that looks into, for example, any of the other routes or grades or even systemology or other pursuits on the internet, other authors and their literature, they're going to find a lot of this magical and occult and mystical information or semantics being displayed. And that's one of the purposes of the Great Magickal Arcanum. So the Great Magickal Arcanum, it took another 10 years after the Sorcerer's Handbook for me to put together Arcanum. And that was released. We used to have, starting with the original one, these discovery events. Now we have conferences and lectures, different things. On the summer solstice 2008, we had the Great Magickal Arcanum Discovery event, and this was also the Mardukite Zuism and Systemology founding, you know, technically. We released Arcanum to the underground and had an event. We had dozens of people at the original Mardukite offices, and this turned into a series of releases and work under the Mardukite banner. A year later, we had another discovery event for the release of Liber N as the Necronomicon. And then as we would continue each annually, we would usually have a big encompassing, this is our year in review type event, which was usually solidified with some kind of book or anthology of the work that had taken place during the previous year. Now, Arcanum is a little different. It's definitely a unique literary contribution of mine, because before all of this other work that I was later known for, or even put together, this synthesized my attempts at that time in 2008, or what I had done by 2008. It took about 2 years to actually write out and refine Arcanum systematically. And the purpose of it being not to create a large A to Z encyclopedia of magic, but to actually unify the knowledge that had already come under the folds of the New Age, because it was no longer specific to just magical and mythological forms of occultism. Now we were starting to deal with more of what was classified as pseudoscientific, or the metapsychologies, and even quantum and string theory. And so we were seeing the same analysis of life, universe, everything taking place around us at just more varying degrees of external technology and the information age. We launched the Mardukite movement at the same time they turned on the Hadron Collider, within the same year. A lot of things taking place now that really weren't there before. Even the semantics of the sciences have been shifting and changing, particularly when you start to deal with quantum theories and string theory. Now, you don't need to understand those semantics in order to understand what we're dealing with. The point being that the work that we're doing and the work that's been relayed, starting with the Great Magickal Arcanum and starting your seekers right down there with grade 1, it's universal. And it is a unified, we're looking at the same objective universe taking place around us, but our understanding of it being fixed to whatever paradigm we're choosing to adopt at the time. And my original approach was to simply unify psychology and metaphysics with the occult sciences. Now, this was before it was a trendy thing to do. Now you hear all about quantum fields and akashic realities and you know, using black boxes and crystal capacitors and all kinds of things. Now, but back when we were establishing this wasn't really even a thing. Just like when we first launched Mardukite Ministries, Ancient Aliens wasn't a show on television. It wasn't Anunnaki wasn't a household word, wasn't just a generally known concept. So we were dealing with unfamiliar territory at the beginning of our organization, and there's a lot of things now that we might take for granted, but at the time it was new, it was innovative, and we were still uncertain of exactly where we were putting our next footfall. With Arcanum, there was at least a unifying picture, and the purpose of it, to break down the vocabulary or the semantic barriers that were in place between mythologies, sciences, religions. We weren't seeing in this information age and the internet and all this freedom of information that everybody's, you know, pulling for, that it wasn't necessarily moving us towards a unification, a global unity, or progressing our understanding. It was the accumulation of more and more facts. This continues to the present day. Without actually systematically approaching this data, it is virtually impossible to make heads or tails out of it. Therein lying the Great Magickal Arcanum, the unintelligibly articulable truth behind all of this, what it is all pointing towards, what it all means, and that unfortunately when you get down too close into it and too fixed into the little intricacies, as people have a tendency to do, you don't see that picture anymore. And you know, that seems cliche. Oh well, you know, the closer you look, the less you see. Well, more important than that, the more fixed the attention is, and the more rigid that its parameters are as to what's possible, acceptable, and real is a defining factor. So therein lies really the benefit to Route A. Because what magic and mysticism does for most people, and what that lunar level really is for most people, is the first breakaway from the heavy pulls and ties that are found succumbing to and participating and agreeing to only a physical and material form of things. Because obviously we know there's much more. But they become counter thoughts and counterproductive to our own productivity when we say, oh, well, yes, we know that, but then we go back to the patterns and systematic reactivity of the human condition, which only further agrees and validates to the most material, mundane levels. So we work against ourselves when we just shoot for the stars and try to reach for affinity, and then find that, well, it's not quite within our grasp, and then we recoil back and go, well, I didn't reach it then, so I'm just going to try a little bit less next time, because really it doesn't seem accessible to me, and all this seems really ridiculous and a bunch of fantasy and so on and so forth. And so hence the purpose of our graded system, because you start to give people, you know, they have these high expectations of and goals of what they think different paths or results are going to be for them, and if they don't get those wins along the way, they're not going to continue along the way. So a big part of it is really just understanding what the stuff is. It's not so much important that they practice all these rituals or experiment with all these spells, and most of this stuff you can really do at a thought level. I mean, although there is a purpose behind making the body do movements at will, making it extend its reach and withdraw, putting significances into objects and other aspects of ritual, these are all tools. And that's one of the aspects of the magical tradition that many practitioners really miss out on. All of the power and the significance and importance gets placed into the tool, not the individual. The magic is somehow confixed into the wand is somehow charged independent of the individual, and so that's where the power lies. Again, misplacing cause, misplacing the ability to be source. That doesn't mean you couldn't, in essence, consciously, knowingly, and willingly grant a beingness to a piece of wood with the intentions, and because of its particular wood cut at the proper time and season while facing the right direction and standing on one foot. There's no reason why that can't be practiced and be effective. There's also no reason why that is the only way things must be practiced to be effective and get the results. And so we find a rigid constriction that forms when a practitioner believes they have ability, but only under the proper conditions, and only if the stars are aligned, and so on and so forth. And this is one of the trappings of the occult, because it gives the illusion that yes, there is more than, but it's not you, and you're still putting a misappropriated formation of source outside of self. Realize there's something more than the physical universe, so we get to this realm where things are magical and things are enchanting, and it is a more than or greater than, but we aren't necessarily free of the human condition. We've elevated our awareness, as we say in Systemology, our actualized awareness. We've elevated our point of beingness and knowingness to a point greater than, or above, or at a higher frequency than what it means to be fixed into the point of view of just this material meat body physical condition. Now, there's a lot of material out there, and that's one of the things that Arcanum is meant to start breaking down. And what it does is it allows, I mean, go off of the Sorcerer's Handbook as your basic, you know, here's the steps of actualizing how, you know, magic. It is effective. It is an effective formula and curriculum. It works very expeditiously. But there's obviously a lot more to it. It's a handbook for a reason. That was why it was intended to be a handbook separate from a larger textbook. And it was not meant to replace supplemental studies or other lectures or other lessons. It was simply a handbook to have access to the most important aspects of learning the route of magic. Now, it's been now incorporated into this edition of the Great Magickal Arcanum, but as a standalone, it is an excellent reference in and of itself. Now, the Great Magickal Arcanum works in a very systematic way. Before we're even pushing the concept of systemology verbatim, it is intended to be an integral study. It doesn't really have a starting point. And that's why, as a standalone, either without the Sorcerer's Handbook or without some additional background or without being guided by a master in this tradition, the Arcanum mainly sits on most people's shelves that have owned it in the last decade as a reference book, simply as a reference to look up various topics and so on and so forth. And although it doesn't have a specific starting point, what it does have is these, well, what I was referring to as links. You know, it's a book, but in a virtual sense, they're links. They're bold-faced words that appear throughout the text, which are actually the titles of the entries. So while you're reading one of the texts and you come across one of these bold-faced words, that's a word that has its own entry within Arcanum. So although it needed to be A to Z, otherwise you'd be sitting there hunting through trying to figure out where the next section or reference would be. But the purpose of it wasn't actually to be just an A to Z reference. The purpose of it was to have an integrated collection of related knowledge that the facets could be cross-referenced easily. And so a broad subject might bring up several dozen other elements that you might reference in order to have a better understanding of that subject or what the concept is. And to do that, I mean, the book is already nearly 1,000 pages long. And in doing that, I was able to eliminate 1,000 pages because all of the information is interconnected. Things don't need to be repeated in one section that have already been displayed in another. And this has allowed, you know, me to present it as this complete, you know, master course in magic because of the way it is all encompassing. Now, it doesn't mean it has every fact, figure, date, and name that you could research or find in history or in some reference book somewhere, but it does provide all of the key material about where the concept of magic, as it's understood in contemporary New Age metaphysics, meets, for example, the fields of magic or other paradigms of magic, the sciences, even Druidism, ancient Mesopotamia, even Systemology. I mean, really, it's kind of as they say, the whole meal can be, you know, tasted within the first bite, because the purpose is not to be unnecessarily esoteric here. A person could definitely flatten and work out all of the intricacies of using a magical tradition and still reach the higher points of actualization and realizations that we work with in Systemology. However, without a higher level understanding beyond just what is relayed verbatim at the core of magical materials and druidry and so forth, the chances are that most practitioners and initiates actually aren't going to get to those realization points. And so most of them, they just kind of spend the rest of their time mulling about in those paradigms. And for some people, maybe that is the point that they've agreed to or decided to become fixed to for this lifetime. Maybe that's milestones ahead of where they've come from. Now, a lot of the people that we're finding that are dealing in systemology and the high-level work, these are people that, metaphysically, esoterically, and it starts to, get pretty fanciful for those that aren't ready to grasp or confront such levels of understanding or such concepts. But these are people that have spent lifetimes in these pursuits. These are people that have literally been around the block many, many times, looking down these avenues and alleyways and transversing them back and forth and leaving breadcrumbs and beacons for themselves, and people that have even been there present when these traditions were alive and active. Those that carry memory of different time periods, different cultures, different themes, or even put out or projected ahead of themselves that certain things would be left for them, or beacons or whatnot, to recognize where they are on the pathway. I didn't create this pathway. I've recognized it. I've systematized it. I've developed materials that I believe best represent what these degrees and levels and gradients are. But this isn't my own creation. I'm simply systematizing it and bringing it into a communicable level of reality. So these are people now that have come to recognize different elements, whether it was from the Necronomicon or Druidism or magic, occultism, the sorcery, and of course systemology, and are like, this is where they need to be, and this is where they're working at, and this is what's important, because at a higher level, this is of course what's important. And not everyone is going to be able to access it from this level. Now you got to wonder why sometimes, and that's one of the things that's uncovered later on. An individual that's strongly put off by owning a book with a pentagram on it is obviously conditioned or has reactive programming about that, since there's nothing inherently wrong with a piece of cardboard with some ink on it. Now, all of that other significance is given by self, and that is one of the key elements to a master understanding of magic and mysticism and the mysteries, versus one that is just coming up into it, either self-initiated or improperly trained, that fails to understand that self is the one doing all this. Self is the one participating, creating the imagery, reacting to the imagery, and then acting out in an objective universe. And this whole energetic feedback relay system of what we consider life and the experience of the universe and everything as our reality, this is a participation point. And this participation point is generally referred to as will, the will, or else power of intention. But specifically will, and we see this word will pop up quite frequently in the old esoteric texts, the ones that many people based these watered down kind of traditions that we see today being sold in pop culture, new age books, and so forth. But the oldest texts deal primarily with will, and will being the directive ability of self to create energy and to affect the universe of space and time. And this is something that's lost in a lot of the more fluffy, conventional New Age systems of magic and mysticism. And so this is something that we don't want our seekers to succumb to, because there's a big draw now to the magic and the mysteries and the fantasy and what this could all mean, and even the upper routes into looking into ancient Europe and other traditions and cultures around the world, and Mesopotamia and our systemology. Now, there have always been the true wizards and mystics and individuals that represented these ideals. However, what has been passed off in most cases today, particularly even in the underground, it's not just exclusive to the mainstream, is usually one more way of getting an individual sealed into one or another paradigm, one another culture or pantheon of spirits or deities, and seldom do we see a larger, all-encompassing understanding come into it, or a point where an individual is elevated up and beyond from those systems that they are working with. So, I mean, it becomes almost a matter of a drug on whether or not the individual is using the drug or the drug is using the individual. And there have always been possessors of hidden and esoteric and occult knowledge. And there is also the organizations and materials and stuff that's available to you more readily that really is just either fancy uses of psychology and basic principles of Hermetic or New Thought, mixed with a lot of obscure symbolism and a lot of unnecessary trivial rigmarole that really does not contribute anything to developing someone further. The real purpose of the magical tradition, as studied with the Great Magickal Arcanum and Sorcerer's Handbook, is to get an individual out of the patterned systems that they are used to. So they put on a new attire, a fanciful robe, they set up their own sacred space, they conduct themselves within this space, they give symbols and tools and iconic images certain meanings and significances, which are then played with this in this environment. And this is actually all very good practice for self to begin to resume the power of will and intention. All excellent. Excellent ways of breaking away from old patterns and old reactivity and victimization, and actually being at cause and at play in this universe. The only danger is when this becomes the end-all be-all understanding for the individual. And so once we can flatten this understanding of this concealed and secret knowledge, once we can open up the folds of these ancient mystery traditions, then we can lay it all out in the light and we can see it as it is. It no longer has any effect on us. It no longer has any control as source over us. We can see it for what it is. We can call it for what it is, create or destroy it as we need to, as to what we decide is effective for our own individual pathway, and remove all that which does not survive the acid test of effectiveness, that which liberates us enough to release and move on to higher levels of understanding.